Hey there. Welcome to the Misty Winston Show. Boy, oh boy, y'all. Okay, first of all, we have an amazing hour lined up for you. My good friend Collin Radix-Carter is in the house. But before we bring him in, we have to discuss this Trump town hall. It's so funny. Okay, so normally I don't spend a lot of time on stuff like this. If you have been following me for any length of time or listening to me for any length of time, you know that I am pretty much over electoral politics in general. I pay attention to it. I watch it because of my job and because of what I do. And also I just want to be educated, right? So I pay attention. I don't really like talking about it because I think electoral politics is just it's a dog and pony show and a massive waste of time and energy at this point, in my opinion. And this is no different. This town hall is no different. This is all a show. It's all a performance that, you know what I mean? It's all ridiculous. However, this was kind of something because, and to be fair, to put all the cards on the table, I didn't get to watch the whole thing yet. My kid's birthday is tomorrow, so I was trying to catch it in between wrapping presents and baking cupcakes. It sounds like really domesticated, but that's what I was doing. And so I only caught, a couple clips here and there. But what I did see was this, and it was, I don't even know how to put this. It was, I'll just say it was a shit show. CNN chose someone named Caitlin Collins, who I've never heard of, to host this thing. And I don't watch mainstream media really at all. Clips every once in a while when I watch somebody else's show and they're talking about what mainstream media has said, that's about it. So I don't know any of these people, but, and I can't, okay. Trump ran circles around her, despite her desperate attempts and what I saw, her attempts to interrupt him and speak over him, which I don't blame her because he tries to take over the conversation. So I understand that to some extent. And I can't stand Trump. I think he's a corrupt, narcissistic coward and an opportunist, as they all are. Like, he is part of the club. I mean, there's no denying. I know his supporters love to pretend that he's an outsider. He's not an outsider. He has been part of that club for a very long time. He goes, you know what I mean? Like, they vacation together and their kids are friends and it's a show. Like, it's a show. It's a soap opera with psychopaths. But he ran circles around this Caitlin Collins woman, in what I saw. And there's absolutely no question that tonight was a win for him. He was miles more lucid and coherent than Biden has been on his very best day over the past couple of years. Like, that's not an exaggeration. It's so funny. We were used to seeing Biden and his inability to, form a coherent sentence or, find his way off of a stage. And then, and Trump's not very smart. I mean, you know what I'm saying? But it just that lucidity, I think it was like, oh God, yeah, okay, this is what somebody sounds like who can put a sentence together. It's great. And I think the Democrats need to be very, very worried about putting Biden on a debate stage with him. Biden has done nothing but go downhill since the last time they were on a debate stage together. I think that's going to be a disaster. They're going to need a lot of medication to get him through that, frankly. I think, in my opinion, don't come for me. Okay, so I do have a clip. I want to play this clip because I think it's pretty indicative. It's only about a minute long, so let's check this out real quick.
Back to what happened on that day.
You said you weren't. Say that.
He has testified that, Mr.
He
President.
did not say that.
But you said you weren't very involved that day. You did tell your supporters to come to Washington. You tweeted about it, about that speech that happened on the rally.
Am I allowed to say that?
When they went to the Capitol and they were breaking into the Capitol, smashing windows, injuring police officers, why did it take you 3 hours to tell them to go home?
I don't believe it did. Oh, let me pull it out. I have to pull it out. So if you look at, on January 5th, the day before, I said, please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful. Stay peaceful. This was the day before, and this was in the form of Twitter. Now I use Truth Social. I think it's far superior, okay? I hope everybody's on Truth. If you look January 6th, this is before 2:30. I am asking for everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful. This is right after, as it was happening. But what happened is they took it down. I don't know why. I think they took it down because it was so good. They didn't like it being up there. I am asking, and we didn't know until I got it back, because now I have 90 million people waiting for me to go back, but I'm on Truth and I'm staying on Truth. Listen, I am asking for everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful. No violation. We want no violation. We want no violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order. Respect the law and our great men and women in blue. Thank you. That was at 2:30. That was very early.
Mr. President, I looked at the same timeline that you did.
No,
Once
I know,
it was
but you
clear,
didn't report that. You know why? Because it was
we did
taken
report
down.
it. I was reporting
it was
that
taken
thing.
down.
Okay, she didn't report it. Nobody reported that. Everybody claimed that Trump encouraged violence and incited violence. That's not the case. I mean, that's not to say that he wasn't fine with seeing it play out or was a participant in, whatever. But he never once on social media did he call for or incite violence. And yet they deplatformed a sitting president pretty much from the entire internet. Everybody took him down. A sitting president. That is crazy. If people are not concerned about that precedent, it means that I do not know what to tell you. So I love that clip just because, I mean, it just kind of shows the general feel of the whole event. He ran circles around her. He pulled out his tweets, printed out tweets. There's a lot of things that he said that sucked, but I think that he ran circles around her. And I think that, honestly, I don't think that wasn't intentional. I think CNN would love to have him back. He's a great ratings boost. They're going to end up propping him up again. They gave him billions of dollars in free coverage the first time. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that at all. Okay. So don't forget, you can follow me over on Twitter at Sarcasm Stardust. The Substack is mistywinston.substack.com. You can find a write-up of our guests every day, so you can find and follow their work as well. And I often have people asking me how they can find shows that they miss. For example, a bunch of people asked me today how they could find my conversation that I had last night with Kit Cabello. So if you miss your favorite TNT radio show or interview, you can listen back anytime that you want, wherever you want. You just have to visit the episodes tab on the TNT Radio website. It's tntradio.live. And then we are also on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, Podbean, iHeart, and TuneIn. So there's no reason for you to miss anything right here on TNT Radio.
Getting straight to the facts.
Enough with the lies. We need facts.
This is today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, I'm very excited. My friend Collin is here. Okay, so Collin Radix-Carter is an anti-war and anti-imperialism activist. He's an educator, organizer. He's an independent. He's also co-founder of Indie News Network, who does fantastic work. Please go check out all the things that they're doing over there. He co-hosts INN News on Wednesday nights. He's based in the DC metro area. He attended the Rage Against the War Machine anti-war rally in February. He's a staunch advocate for workers and organizing and owning the means of production. And then he also covered several events for INN on the ground. He interviewed people of APSP and more for INN News. So, Collin, my friend, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. First of all, I owe you an apology because this is the first time I've had you on. Like, Indy was like, hey, why don't you have Collin? I'm like, dude, why hasn't that happened yet? So welcome finally to the show. I appreciate you coming.
No problem.
Okay, so I want to ask you first. I usually ask everybody who I have on the show who is a fellow content creator or somebody else who is in the independent media space. I'm always curious about how people get started. I feel like you and I have a lot in common because I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like your activism led you here, as did mine. Is that what it was?
In a roundabout way, sure. Indirectly, but I think now that I've kind of been in the space, I think initially, they were kind of separate, but I feel like now, especially doing this consistently for well over a year, I'm seeing ways of how being in the space like you can help enhance the activism that I'm doing. Funny how that works.
Yes. Yes.
But, so I'm a teacher, tried and true. I've been teaching now. I've been in the field now for nearly 20 years now. And when I moved to DC, almost 7 years ago, I joined, a teacher advocacy group in the city. I just wanted an outlet just in terms of, just seeing a lot of the injustice in our education system, and just feeling kind of stifled in terms of not necessarily being able to have a say in terms of what I was seeing at my school and in connection with that, my community. So I found this group and I just kind of dove right in. This was the year before the pandemic. And so, so I was doing that for a year, and then obviously, 2020 happened, pandemic happened, and I was home virtually for like a few months. So obviously having a little bit more time at home, I was able to listen to more independent independent media during my off times. And then, so I started watching Jimmy Dore a little bit more. I started watching Rising a little bit more. I was watching Richard Medhurst a little bit more. And then actually from there, I became a part of Richie Medhurst's Discord. And then from that, I got connected with Indy. He would argue that I wasn't paying him any mind, and I wasn't, because I was just like, I'm just here just to chat, because like I had nothing else to do. And so, but from that, we kind of, I knew of him and he knew of me, but we never really connected. And then I actually was thinking about starting my own channel, kind of coming out of that, because I traveled to Africa several times within the last decade. And I just felt like one of the things I kind of thought about was in terms of there are a lot of things that are going on the continent that people do not necessarily know about, that being on the ground there in terms of, I was there for a project that I was kind of working on in assisting a children's ministry program at the time. And so I saw a lot of stuff just living among, I don't want to say poor, but definitely relatively to here they were.
Sure.
But I saw a lot of growth. I think honestly that was where, my political awakening kind of started, because being away, out of the country and living in the bush, it made me realize how much America is actually shit. And coming back, I just felt very disengaged about living in America. And I think that kind of sentiment just kind of grew, culminating in 2016. But then like the pandemic happened, and then just thinking about all these things, I was like, maybe I should start a channel just to kind of start talking about these things. And so I just kind of kept in the back of my mind. And then during Force the Vote, I hosted Jackson Hinkle at my house. I helped him organize that event. And so we had a lot of downtime. So I was just talking to him a lot, and just randomly, I just asked him, because I just got connected with Jackson at the time, and I was at the time a fan of his, and so like I had this opportunity just to ask him, like, I kind of made a pitch to him about doing this as like thinking in terms of issues in Africa and how he felt about me doing it. And he said, absolutely. No one's talking about that. And you have a unique voice for that. So you should go for it. And let's just say I got very scared, because obviously the idea of doing this, I'm a very private person in general, and I don't like putting my business out there. And, especially online, like you have an opinion, people can say a lot of shit about you. And I didn't want to necessarily have all of that kind of
yes, they can
coming back at me. So I kind of avoided, like not doing or not premiering my personal channel at all. And so eventually it took me a few months, but then I did. And I think in the midst of this, Indy was just kind of watching me. And because
he's such a creeper.
I love him though. Like
I'm teasing him. He knows I love him. But, I'm just teasing. That's exactly it.
But he kind of knew what I wanted to do. And I think he was just kind of interested to see where it would go. And so like after I did my first, literally within 24 hours after I did my first stream, which was, there was just so much drama around it, but I did it, because I did it alone, and I kind of did the thing and went off. I was like, okay,
that's brave.
Like Indy contacted me, like I think within 24 hours after that, and he was like, hey, I'm looking to start a network. I think you would be a great addition, and you have a lot to say, especially on Twitter. And I think you're needed in terms of having a unique voice in terms of who you are, as a Black immigrant, but also having been outside the U.S., grew up outside the U.S., and so having a unique perspective that was needed. And at the time, I was just kind of like, I was interested, but the idea of being on a network wasn't like something it's a lot, but
Yeah.
But I thought about in terms of having a community where I was able to kind of learn how to do this. It kind of appealed to me. So I said, sure. And yeah, that's my origin story. And just from there, Reef a few months later asked me to be on INN News. And initially I told him hell no, because I just felt I was just so busy. But he kept at it, and I was just like, I kind of relented. And 1 year later, I'm still doing it, and it's hard work.
Yeah, it is.
But I found it's helped me kind of understand myself, believe it or not, understand more in terms of my job as a teacher, and kind of making these connections in terms of how everything works in our government and how it kind of directly affects me, which ultimately helps me be a better advocate, because I'm a little more versed in the issues that.
And you just understand. Yeah, you just understand that the way that the system works, and you get I think that it's especially with your job being an educator, all of this stuff is so intrinsically connected that you can't help but improve on things elsewhere when you just are paying attention. And it's just unfortunate that, I mean, as you said, it took COVID for you to like really have time to like listen to to like educate yourself, because it's hard to like find information, find people to listen to, all of that stuff. And so I think a lot of people are just so busy they don't have time for it. Okay, we got to take a quick break. Everybody hang tight. We're going to be right back with more from Collin right after this here on TNT Radio.
You should hear what Joe Hoft is talking about.
And that was the point I made. Trump's way ahead of everybody on the Republican side. He's way ahead of Biden. I just read a piece. If the election were today, Trump would win in a major landslide. He's way ahead of Biden. Biden's a clown. Let's face it. The guy's not there. They've thrown this guy in front of us. They think it's funny. And I guess they think that they're going to win again because they own the elections. So they're going to steal it again. It doesn't matter who they throw up. They could put up this box of Kleenex beside me, and it will win at this point in time. That's how confident they are. So that tells you how absolutely corrupt our election process is. We still have the cowards from the GOP that won't say anything about it, that think it's offensive to say anything. They're being led by their leadership, who are criminals, and side with the Democrats in this effort to get rid of Trump. That's going to be the backbreaker. If they indict President Trump in D.C. in a corrupt court in front of corrupt judges, and if the if the Supreme Court doesn't step in, we're going to have a major problem. We're going to have a major problem in this country, because Trump is crushing everyone right now in the race for the presidency.
Joe Hoft on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
You're invited to join the pilgrimage to Bath, United Kingdom this June, where we will unveil a better way for health, freedom, and sovereignty. The Better Way Conference is a 3-day solutions-based conference with more than 50 expert speakers from around the world. Our Master of Ceremonies, Neil Oliver, will take us on a journey through 8 inspiring conversations, addressing the issues that matter most to individuals and families around the world right now. Hear from speakers like Dr. Pierre Corey, Matthias Desmet, Dr. Vandana Shiva, and other leading international minds as we continue to co-create a better way forward. Panel hosts include James Corbett of The Corbett Report, Richard Vobes, The Bald Explorer, and the New Americans, Veronica Karolinko, and many more. Wherever you are in the world, you can join us in person or online for less than £40 or $50 for the full program. Get your full conference, single day, or virtual passes now at betterwayconference.org. Please join, share, and collaborate with us as we create a better way for a better world.
You're with Misty Winston on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, we are here with Collin Radix-Carter. All right, so we're talking a little bit about your job as an educator and just how that informs everything that you do. And I know that you've been doing this for years, right? Like, I mean, as you said, you've been in the industry, I guess, the whatever it is, the education business, because I feel like that's what it is, really. For almost 20 years. And so I'm super curious to like pick your brain about the state of the education system, because I think we've all seen the way that it has been completely co-opted, and it's so watered down, Collin. They are, it's awful. The education system is awful. So what's your experience been like over the past 20 years, witnessing all this firsthand?
It's been interesting for me. I've had the opportunity, I've worked in every type of schooling situation you can imagine. I've worked in public, I've worked in charter, I've worked in private. I was abroad a little. I wouldn't count that. You can kind of align it to education. Being abroad it was kind of adjacent to. But I've been involved in early childhood, basically, from the beginning of my career, unintentionally. But I ended up there. I kind of stayed there because I kind of found my voice there. It took me a decade to kind of figure that out, but our education system really doesn't prepare our students, our children, for what, like my kids, I teach pre-K, so they're 4 or 5 years old. And I often think about the hell that they have to go through by the time they become adults. And I feel like the way that we educate them doesn't necessarily force them to challenge the status quo in terms of really fighting for the radical change that we need in order to make our world better. I think about this all the time. And I think for me, especially given that, at least in the area of DC where I work, they're privileged. So generally for them, they will be mostly okay. But for kids who are living in lower income situations that need more of a leg up, I think about them all the time and just who's speaking for them in terms of their livelihoods and their education, like what they aspire to do, how they're able to progress in the midst of a system that actively hates us, and especially people of color in particular. It's frightening to me, and honestly, I feel kind of guilty because I feel in a lot of ways that I'm kind of in a system that essentially promotes capitalism. And I really don't like the idea.
We all are.
We all are.
Yeah.
And but I think especially being in independent media with the stuff that I know that 90% of the people in probably the world don't necessarily know or think about, it kind of brings more of a deeper and a more depressing perspective to it, if that makes any sense. And I think about that all the time. And like one of the things I say on INN is, seizing the narrative that we, like on the ground need to seize the narrative in terms of helping people understand our stories so that we can actually make change. And I think about that in terms, like I teach young kids, like they get no love in our world at all. Like because they're little and people assume that they don't know anything, that they're meant to just kind of follow along what the adults say to them. But in my experience working with little kids, and I'm very fortunate that I work at a school where I am forced to listen to them. I am forced to have them tell me what they value. And my job is to help facilitate their learning. That I think about that all the time in terms of how can I help my students find their voice in terms of the curriculum that I kind of advocate for them to do.
Yeah. And you probably have really, I'm sure you have to teach a certain curriculum, and I'm sure you have to be very mindful of how you teach things, which as you should. Like, I mean, I don't agree with like teachers rolling up into class and, forcing their own personal politics on little kids or anything like that. But I think just what you're saying is like just facilitating the ability for them to feel confident enough to speak when it's necessary or whatever. And I think it just makes me really sad, I think the most, because we live right now. And I think in particular, our kids are going through so much that I don't think we even recognize how drastically that has shifted. I mean, there's just, we now, both parents have to work multiple jobs if there are two parents, and usually there's not. And even if they're, are divorced parents and they get along, there's so much happening to our kids right now. The lockdowns, I think the lockdowns were unbelievably terrible for our kids. There's just so much. And it just makes me really sad because I feel like the entire system is failing the young people of this country in so many different ways. It's a lot.
It's a lot. And I think about that all the time. I think especially the idea now that basically for all intents and purposes, we're out, pandemic's over formally today, by this time, today, and there were underlying issues in education that a tale as old as time that were never really addressed. And I think, the pandemic
made it so much worse. It made it so much worse, Collin. It really did. And I think it highlighted a lot of issues, which is good. I think a lot of it did. I think a lot of parents are suddenly like, oh, wait a minute. Like I get it. It's a whole different ballgame. Okay, we have to get some headlines real quick. So let's grab a couple headlines. We're going to be right back in just a second with Collin right here on TNT Radio.
Today's News Talk Radio.
I like hearing the news. A lot of news.
TNT Radio News.
Top of the hour, every hour.
TNT.
Matt Boyland here with a look at your TNT headlines. US President Joe Biden has been accused of selling out America for cold hard cash and taking bribes from corrupt foreign nationals during his time as vice president. Over 400 bodies have been recovered from the mud following catastrophic flooding in the Central African country of Congo. More than 5,000 people remain unaccounted for. And Ukraine has been accused of bombing a Russian pipeline used to pump oil to the EU.
This is the Misty Winston Show on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, we're here with Collin Radix-Carter. And yeah, Joe Biden's corrupt. Who would have thunk it? I never would have guessed it. They're all corrupt. Everybody, they're all corrupt. Every last one of them, all of them, without exception. Even your favorite. I don't care who it is. They're corrupt. Period. You can't exist in that system without being corrupt. If you are not corrupt, one of two things happens. You assimilate or they'll find a way to get you out. So if somebody is in government for more than like a term, you know that they're corrupt, period. That's just it. Can we stop pretending otherwise? Okay. All right. So yeah, the education system, I think, has been on just an unbelievable downward slope for so long, and it's intentional. It's an indoctrination system really at this point. It has nothing to do with, actually educating kids. It's about force feeding information. And as George Carlin would say, making us smart enough to run the machines. That's all it is.
It's all it is. And and that's kind of my frustration being in it, because I feel in a lot of ways that I'm kind of perpetuating that. I feel privileged, and I say that in huge quotations because I have a lot to say in terms of what my children are learning. I don't use like a textbook or whatever, like for most of the stuff that I do, although a lot of that pre-packaged curriculum stuff is slowly trying to infiltrate its way into kindergarten, which not a fan of, but being in the system I don't have a lot of choice in that, but I can control most of the stuff that is happening in my classroom, which I feel privileged for. I know other colleagues in other schools and even in my district don't have that privilege. And I think about that all the time. But that being said, I think in the grander scheme of things, I agree. It's more of an indoctrination in terms of what to think and how to think, instead of challenging you how to think. And how to challenge the system that you're in, and in order to make, life better for yourself and then for the people around you. And that's something that, especially for young kids, I think they have innately, but obviously as they get older, they kind of lose that in terms of force feeding you information that they're supposed to know, in order to do well on a standardized test, in order for you to kind of do well in terms of like getting into the certain school, getting into the certain college, getting into the certain job, having the certain spouse, living in a certain town, and just kind of be kind of numb to, I think, the reality of, what the world is really like. And so for me, it's, again, like that's kind of what I'm trying to advocate for in the best way that I can, to try and combat against that in terms of, not just for students, but teachers as well. Being able to have more autonomy in their classrooms, to be able to kind of say, knowing my class or knowing my community, this is what my children need. This is what our families need. This is what our communities need, so that we're able to best serve, our students in context of the communities that they come from.
Yeah, it's like we're not interested in actually building kids up to be the best that they can be. We just want them to be a robot, essentially. I mean, really, that's what it is. It's just this kind of perpetuation of a system that, again, they want you smart enough to run the machines. They don't want you to question. They don't want you to think. They don't want you to. I mean, we literally had people telling us. I know this is a big section of Jimmy Dore's new comedy special, "COVID Lies Are Funny," which, by the way, is out now on his website. And this, he didn't ask me to do this. It's not like a promotion. It's just hilarious. You should go check it out. But there's like a big piece in there where he talks about this, and you know, it is just, it's really depressing. It's really depressing to me that you know, we have this situation where kids are just like, and there's nothing personal about it. Because I think some kids, it makes me frustrated that we spend a lot of time on generalized subject matter instead of, oh, hey, you're really good at math. You really like math. Let's focus on that. Like, hey, that's what you're good at. It's what you enjoy. Let's do that. Or, hey, you really like to write. Let's focus on that. Let's build up that skill. Instead, we're like, it's all the same. It's like this cookie cutter, idea of education. And that's just not how kids work. And it's very frustrating that it's obviously not working, Collin. Like, it's not working. And go ahead.
Yeah, it's not working. And most teachers will tell you that it's not working, and they don't necessarily have the support to be able to modify curriculum or, to switch things around to meet the uniqueness of students in their classrooms and being able to support them in the skills that they need, so you're right. Yeah. I think it's just kind of more or less, very much a cookie cutter situation, which again, I feel like for me teaching young kids, I don't have to worry.
There's some
about
freedom,
that as much, which is, I have a lot of freedom there, which is why I say to people, I'm good with teaching pre-K. I'm good because I have a lot more freedom in that, in terms of being able to kind of tailor my curriculum to what they dictate to me is what they value to learn. And so, but they lose that as they get older, in the line of, being just another cog in the machine, as they say.
Well, then they're immediately, it's like standardized testing immediately. And standardized testing is stupid. I have severe ADHD. I do not test well. And that is not an accurate representation of a child's intelligence or capabilities or anything. Standardized testing is stupid beyond measure. And the idea that we're still doing it is so absurd to me. But I think it just speaks to the corruption of the system, because there's like a whole, like I said earlier, it's an industry at this point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's nuts.
Well, yeah. And it's the idea for me, and I was strongly against it. And unfortunately, we didn't do this at my school, at least this year, but in a huge way. But, like a lot of schools would make it like almost like a pep rally for students taking standardized tests. And I'm like, no, like if I'm going to do that, I'm going to value who the kids are. Like, I'm going to celebrate who you are, not to do this in terms of you taking a test that, say is important, but at the end of the day, it's not indicative of your child's intelligence or how they think. It's just if they're able to kind of play to the test, and if they're able to test well, then they will allegedly will be successful. And I sucked. Like standardized testing in school too. Fortunately, I ended up going to good schools, like in terms of college and even like for high school and middle school. But it should not be the standard that we set, really, in terms of evaluating students and ultimately evaluating schools that that funding is affected based on the performance on students taking these tests.
Yes. Can we talk about that for a second, Collin? Because this is another thing that really bothers me. So a school, okay, let's say there's two schools. One does really well on the standardized test. The other one does not do well on the standardized test. They give more money to the school that already did good, and they take money away from the school that did bad. It should be the opposite. If a school did not do well on their standardized test, it means they need more assistance. They need more help. They need something. You need to spend more time and money and resources on that school, it needs to get more attention. Clearly, like, and the idea that it's backwards is completely absurd to me. Like, I don't know who came up with that system, but that's the entire education system is set up that way, where it's there's no logic whatsoever. There's no consistency. There's nothing. It's just like a free for all crazy. Nothing makes sense. This Common Core nonsense that they brought up a few years ago. Like, it's an industry. Like, somebody needed a job, and so they were like, hey, create a thing for the schools. And they're like, okay, Common Core, we're going to come up with this thing. And you know what I mean? Like, it's like lobbyists, it's like consultants. It's like there's this whole industry surrounding education now at this point. And all these people, it's not about the kids anymore. It's just about making money off of it, and then also being able to control people and push a narrative. And that's really all it is anymore. And it's very frustrating that it just keeps getting worse, and people are just like a zombie walking into our own demise. Okay, let's take another quick break. We're going to be right back. Hang tight for just a couple minutes. We're going to be back here on TNT Radio.
With his expert analysis and opinion, this is TNT Radio's Timothy Shea.
Poets among us say that the eyes are the windows to the soul. Well, one thing's for certain, you can always see the crazy in their eyes. From AOC to Bud Light marketing buffoon Alyssa Hirschide to Justice Kavanaugh accuser Crazy Blasey Ford, just one look tells you everything you need to know about their mental state, and enough to know to back away very slowly. So too with phony Trump rape accuser E. Jean Carroll, who can't even remember when the rape occurred or even how it occurred. Just that it occurred in a dressing room at Bergdorf Goodman. Highly unlikely, especially given the fact that President Trump said he doesn't even know who she is. Jury didn't care about that. Nope. They've got to get Trump any way possible. Folks, stay away from people when you can see the cray-cray leaking out their eyeballs. From MAGAInstitute.com, this is Timothy Shea for TNT Radio.
Challenging the consensus and debunking the narrative. This is Viewpoint.
Who is Klaus Schwab, and what is the World Economic Forum which he leads? Just quoting Klaus Schwab is alarming enough. If he and his billionaire friends achieved their great reset, tyranny would be the new world order. Born in Ravensburg, Germany in 1938, Klaus Schwab is a child of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich, a political state regime built on fear and violence, on brainwashing and control, on propaganda and lies. While the Nazis desired a new order for Germany that would last 1,000 years, Klaus Schwab's vision extends globally and would potentially be unstoppable were nations to relinquish all sovereignty and adopt the neurotechnologies and biotechnologies which forces us, in the words of Klaus Schwab, to question what it means to be human.
Misty Winston on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Hey, just a heads up. We have some amazing shows lined up for you for the end of this week. Elizabeth Foss is going to be back on Friday. She has a new article that's coming out. So she was just on last Friday, and we're going to be digging into her new article. And then tomorrow, my dear friend Shanda Masta is going to be back on the show for more media. So definitely don't miss out on that. I love Shanda. I love talking to her. She's just so much fun and always so positive, which I am not. So I need those kind of people in my life. And then tonight, obviously, we're here with Collin Radix-Carter. We're talking about the state of the education system, which is pretty atrocious. So Collin, do you think it's salvageable? Because here's the one thing I will say that I do have some semblance of positivity towards on this issue is that I do think, as I mentioned earlier, COVID was kind of I hate saying like a wake up call, because the woke thing is, a whole thing now. But I think a lot of people did recognize how terrible it is. And and I don't think this is the answer. I think we're starting to see a lot of people who are expressing an interest in homeschooling. That's obviously not sustainable long term for everyone. That's not every parent has the ability to homeschool their kids or the option or the luxury of doing that. So that's obviously not good unless you're only concerned for your own self and your own kids. I'm concerned about society in general. But do you think at this point that it's salvageable? Like, do you think that we can, quote unquote, reform? Because I'm like really anti-reformist. What do you think on this? Because you have obviously much more intel and inside information than I do on this one.
I think it is salvageable if people own the means of production. And I think about this a lot in terms of what does that look like for teachers? We talk about only the means of production in terms of private industry, like Amazon, whatever, but never in terms of like public works, like teachers, engineers, like nurses, like, you know, the blue collar jobs, you know, that it's a little more, it's kind of hard to kind of figure out in terms of what that would look like for them. And I think one thing, as I said, I talked about autonomy in schools, like teachers having a say in terms of, you know, what curriculum should look like, how children should best learn, like what supports do students need given their school or their community. You know, those are the things that teachers being on the ground, especially if teachers have been teaching out of school forever, they have a lot of experience and a lot of say generally in terms of like what should be happening. And often teachers' voices are not represented or not represented enough in terms of the larger conversation. As you mentioned before, it's a lot of lobbyists, it's a lot of industry, it's a lot of corporations that are making the call. And many of these people are not necessarily teachers themselves, but they're the ones that's saying how teachers should teach. That doesn't make any sense to me. And
and this is the problem across, and I hate to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but this is the problem. It's the same way we talked about this with Railroad Workers United. It's a bunch of people making the decisions for rail workers who are not rail workers and they don't care about rail workers. It's the same way. I'm a restaurant person. I worked in restaurants my entire life. My husband still does. And it's the exact same way. There's a lot of people who sit in offices all day who make decisions on what servers are doing in restaurants or what works best for them. And that just does not work. And I think it's the exact same thing with teachers. If you want to have a better education system, then you need to ask teachers. You know what I mean? Like that is your front line. It makes no sense whatsoever to shut them out of the conversation, but that is often what happens. It's very frustrating.
Right. It's very frustrating. And so that's kind of why I'm I speak a lot to the privilege that I have. I think just given my position and where I live in the country, and I think especially being in DC where everybody is trying to change the world, you know, essentially here, you know, like, but I am very fortunate that, I am a part of an organization, called Comrade that, has helped me kind of fought through a lot of these things in terms of, you know, what does being on the ground trying to advocate for teachers look like and how to give them that voice where, you know, being able to talk to councilmen about what the issues are in schools or larger issues that are influencing our communities and, you know, having those interactions and building those relationships in terms of changing policy. And even if you look, you know, just what's happening across the country right now, you know, there's a huge labor movement in terms of like, people striking. Teachers are doing the same thing. And often than not, they're doing it illegally because unions, you know, for whatever reasons, usually are not necessarily working in the best interest for the workers that they claim to, you know, advocate for. And I think it's interesting to see how teachers have been able to kind of do illegal strikes. And shout out to Indian Reef for talking about that, you know, in a lot of ways more than I probably should, you know, and they're not teachers themselves, you know, covering on like how to miss on our other shows on INN. You know, but for me, even learning from them, like, oh, like this is happening in this area, in this city, like teachers are striking, but me being able to say and advocate, you know, in my group, this is what teachers are doing because they're organizing among themselves, or if they have unions that do care, that are actually willing to step out and being able to strike, you know, and often are getting results. So, but obviously those stories are not necessarily talked about that much, you know, because, you know, God forbid if like the working class rises up and actually challenges the establishment somehow. But like, but that's where my hope is. And like, like you, I'm very cynical in terms of just how the world works. But where I do have hope is in my students in terms of saying, in like kind of inadvertently saying to them, you know, especially for my students, like, you grew up with a lot of privilege, and for all intents and purposes, you're going to remain in that privilege for the rest of your life. And I hope that you're able to use that privilege to change your environment and your community and your city and your world for the better. Because we're not going to be around to try and help that, but they will have to be.
Yeah.
And then,
unfortunately, we left them a mess, Colin. That's what I feel really, because I have kids and I look at them every day and I'm like, oh God, we really screwed you guys. We really screwed you guys. And it's just been an accumulation of things. I think every generation gets screwed over harder than the generation before them, because we are each taking on the issues of that aren't getting solved of the previous generation. I think that's really unfortunate, but that's just the nature of things. But what makes me so angry about the education system is that this has been an intentional sabotage of the educational system, because they do want to privatize it. They don't want to have public schools. They want to be able to profit off of it. And so this is the intentional destruction of the public education system, so that people will pull out of it, hate it, all of that stuff. And it's unfortunately that is going to be effective. And I think we'll see. I hope that you're right, and it's that we're able to prevent like a complete disintegration, because it's already bad. Like I think maybe at this point that would be good for it to just dissolve entirely, and then we can rebuild. I'm kind of like a burn it all down kind of person. You know what I mean? Like it's so bad. It is so bad at this point that it seems like, what else can we do? But it's just going to be so catastrophic.
But I'm all for that if it's the workers who are leading that charge, and if teachers are leading that charge, and I'm all for it if they are intentional and having the organization around them that they're able to kind of say, we're willing to rebuild if necessary, unless our demands are met. And I think especially given that this week is Teacher Appreciation Week across the country, so teachers, are getting recognized for the work that they're doing in schools, like they might get their candy or may get free lunch or whatever else. But I think, but
so
I
stupid.
said this, and I saw this tweet, that I retweeted. It's like, give teachers meaningful education policy that makes their work a lot easier. That's what teachers ultimately want. And as I said earlier, is listen to the teachers in the classrooms who are doing the work in terms of how to solve issues in the problem. And you'll be surprised that, especially for ones who have been in the field for a while, we can come up with we have to do this every day, like on the fly, like trying to make sense out of things that do not make sense. Like we do this we do this every day with our students. So if we're able to do that with our students, we definitely have some ideas of how to be able to reform or even just radically change the way things are in terms of how our education system works. But I think a lot of the tie is, and especially for the Black community, we need to return to our radical roots, and my hope is, in terms of being in the profession, that I can do my part to kind of help people, not just, through my work and my advocacy, but even on INN and just at large independent media, for people to kind of look at our revolutionary heroes and our idols back in the day. Because I often feel like we try to reinvent the wheel of things that have been done before. And I'm like, we don't need to do that. All we have to do is kind of look at the examples of people that have done the work before, and obviously having to remix it in terms of what it means in the 21st century. But that's what our education should be. That, that's scary for many people for God forbid, to have, as I said, the working class being able to rise up if they're reading like Malcolm X and like MLK and like Kwame Ture and like all these other revolutionary figures that really shaped the Black experience in particular, and having those students kind of stand up, and really fight, for the things that they need. So that's what I'm hoping for. And at least if I don't have any hope in the system, my hope in my control lies in what I do in my classroom and then in the students that I teach. And that's all I can really do.
Yeah, no, that's true. That is all you can really do. It's just really unfortunate. And I think a lot of people don't realize that all of this stuff takes funding. Like, I think the education system is so, and again, that's by design. They underfund it so that it does fall apart. That is no question by design. But it's very interesting to me when people expect so much from teachers, who are then treated like, second-class citizens at best. I mean, the way that we treat teachers in this country is fascinating to me. I can't think of a more important profession than a teacher. And listen, I understand that there are different levels of teachers. Like, there are bad teachers, 100%, no question. There are people who should not at all be in the teaching profession. But there are I think most teachers are genuinely good people trying the very best to do the best that they can with what they are given. But we like rob them of all of the necessary tools that they need. And if you think about it, again, I can't think of it. Seriously, a teacher, it doesn't matter. A doctor, there's no doctors without teachers. There's no Jeff Bezos without teachers. There's no any of us really without teachers. I mean, even if you are homeschooled, you have a teacher. It's your parents.
Right.
And I just think that the people in charge of educating the future generations in whatever form that it is, we should hold that to the highest esteem, and we should be willing to give that the highest regard and the most funding. And obviously we want it to be something where there's choice for parents who listen, parents want to raise their kids and have them educated in different ways. There needs to be options for that. I think that I'm totally fine with that. I think that there needs to be, it's a big question, and trying to figure out how to make it all work. That's why I just think that at this point, I don't know if we can reform at this point. It's going to take a complete restructuring.
I will say this, and just kind of not necessarily so much teachers, but respect the kids, which we don't do in this country either.
No.
You respect the kids, by association, you respect the teachers. And look what we do with our kids. The buildings that they're in, generally in schools, depending where they are not up to date. The food that we get them to eat in schools is not that great, depending where you are. You don't update their curriculum to what is, necessary for them, and this is kind of the thing that I kind of look at our politicians, especially the ones who were in education, Jamal Bowman, and looking at you in particular. These are the things that you should be advocating for. Stop talking about this bullshit in terms of making a hip hop month or whatever. And instead try and focus on issues that really affect my work. I'm looking at you to advocate these issues as a former principal.
But he'd rather pander to you, Collin. He'd rather pander, and he'd rather flick the crumbs of crumbs in your general direction, and you're just supposed to shut up and say thank you. I mean, that's it.
Right.
That's what this all is. These politicians, they pretend to be interested in these issues, but then they get there and all they do is these superficial platitudes and, the strongly worded letters and the tweets and all of that stuff. And that's it. It's just a show. Like I said, it's a performance. And they don't actually intend on doing anything about these issues ever. They're never, ever going to actually fight or push back against the status quo. They're going to go along to get along, because that's how you stay and you maintain job security in the United States government. That's just it. And they're all very aware of that. They're self-aware, and they also are very opportunistic and selfish and narcissistic, and they all want to keep their jobs, and they want to have the power and the access and the money and the cool parties and all of the stuff that they get to do, and the power especially, I think. But yes, it's terrible. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. I want to make sure that you have time to hype everything, because I know INN has a lot of stuff going on. Please go check out INN. Oh, and also you can go to, Collin mentioned Empowered Ed. You can go to weareempowered.org. That's the group that he works with, if you want to find out more information about that. But okay, tell us everything you got going on over at INN. What's coming up?
All right. So, oh boy, Indy, hopefully I get it all right. So you can find us on Twitter at GetIndyNews. You can find me personally on Twitter. That's basically the social media platform I use pretty much all the time, at Obonna, OGBONNA_Collin with 2 L's. That's where you can find me on Twitter. You can find me and then all the other personalities on INN at getindynews.network. So all of our information is there. And I am generally streaming on INN News with my co-host and colleague Reef Greenland on Wednesday nights at 9 Eastern. For INN News. So I think I covered everything. Hopefully Indy doesn't.
You better hope, or Indy's going to yell at you in the group chat.
He always is I'm good at it, but I think obviously doing this is kind of Make sure to say gettindynews.network. Make sure to say gettindynews.network. So I definitely got that.
You said it.
So,
you said it several times now. Indy, did you hear it? IndyNews.network. For Indy, everybody go to IndyNews.network so Collin doesn't get in trouble. We're just teasing Indy. I know he's listening right now. He has to be. And by the way, Indy runs my Substack, so I love Indy. So yes, we love Indy.
And as you said, you can check out my organization, EmpowerEd, at weareempowered.org.
So go check it out. Get some more information. For sure.
Then, or if any questions, feel free to follow me on Twitter and DM me.
Yeah. Twitter. Oh, you gotta love Twitter. Collin, thanks for coming on the show. It was great to finally have you. As always, I love my Indie News brothers and sisters. So, so I'll be back tomorrow with Shonda Masta. Do not miss that. I love her. She's so great. It's fun to talk to her. We're gonna have a blast. 11 p.m. Eastern, right here on TNT Radio. And as Julian Assange says, learn, challenge, act now. Don't go anywhere. Chris Smith, right after this on TNT Radio.